question is, I have an API gateway, right? And I now want to do about something about, is it safe to use? What are the terms of usage, etc. So this got a question across in terms that, yes, this is something which is hotting up, and with traditional technology being surpassed by modern day technology, APIs are taking a very major, I would say, control in our digital lives. Am I audible to all? Hello? Moini, am I audible?
Yes, we are getting responses in the chat window.
Okay, great. So I'm not looking at my chat window, honestly. So quickly, if there are any questions, just raise the chat window on. I'm just putting my chat window on. So if there are any questions, you can just come back to me on that. So the front end of the organization is, we define this as ourselves as making security simple. And the reason we're talking about making security simple is because, again, the technical jargon on API security is very, very different as compared to when deployments happen. Just to give you a quick idea as what we're going to be covering up today. Now, I'm sure everybody is aware of APIs and application program interface. So I'm sure that you would have a lot of questions on the technology side too. So we're just going to keep very quickly what's hot and trending right now. And the reasons I'm talking about these hot and trending is for the fact that this is going to drop down to exactly why we're talking about APIs and API security. So what's trending right now is typically digital transactions. Now, digital transaction adoption means, we have, as a country, we've started moving into digital technology. But globally, digital transactions have been there for the last 1.5 to 2 decades, right? Which it means typically, if you understand the API, the founding of API security started off, or API started off in early 2000 during a research paper published in the US. That's how the entire API started working out. Second important thing which is hot and trending is open source. Again, I'm talking about open source with regard to APIs, because there's a lot of third-party APIs which are open source right now. Then the other thing which is hotting up is data breaches and privacy requirements. Again, APIs could result in data breaches, could result in privacy requirements being compromised. Then security assessments. Every time I walk across to organizations, I come across these questions, or I ask these questions: what security assessments do you do? And the answers are typically that we do a lot of security assessments on VA and PT, and which are traditional technologies, right? But the moment we ask a question, do you test your APIs? And the answer is, yeah, we use a tool called XYZ. Practically speaking, the tool just gives you the information, or that tool would just give you the information about what are the various URLs available in your application, but it doesn't scan or doesn't test the APIs. So that's a very major issue with regard to API security. The other question which comes across is, are you sure that's an API? Most of the people, typically when they're absorbing APIs, are not even, because they're not developers, they're security people. They're not aware of the fact that the format written, or the format being followed for the RESTful or for the SOAP, or for basically, are they using a Swagger format or using the API 2.0 format? So these are some questions which need to be addressed. Then we're looking at intelligence-driven cybersecurity. Then we're looking at new techniques. And last, API absorption. The quantum of API being absorbed right now in the industry has gone up phenomenal. So when I spoke last to people, let's say in 2016 and 17 in India, not talking about outside India, the quantum of API absorption was not so high. They were aware of APIs, they were consuming APIs, but they were not very aware of how much of APIs were they consuming. Now, as compared to 2019, the awareness has grown up absorbably, very, very high. And the quantum of questions we now started getting from security specialists like you all on the chat right now, or on this session, is, how do I get to ensure that my APIs are following up standards which I have defined them to be? So these are some of the major important aspects. Now, why is it important? API consumption, like I shared with you, if we have bankers here, I'm sure we have some bankers, we have some people from the insurance company, we have a lot of organizations here who would be from different, people from different organizations. the quantum of APIs being consumed. For example, if you look at your simple website, you would be using a Twitter, you would be using a Facebook, you would also be using Google. If you want to give them a link of following your office, you give them a Google API for directions. If you want them to tweet on your channel, so you give them a link for tweeting. Now, all these are APIs which are being there on in being consumed right now by the organization. Now, digital channels are also moving into this. What do I mean by digital channels? Now, I'm talking about mobile applications. When we're talking about mobile applications, we are saying typically all the environments which are being delivered today on by any organization as in software, whether it's in insurance, banking, manufacturing, etc. They all are using mobile applications to deliver. Then the cloud technology, again, cloud integration is very, very important, because the moment everybody is migrating into a cloud, we had the session in November last year with the CSA, and the biggest discussion point was cloud security and what are the major aspects about cloud security one should look into account. So this was a very, very important aspect which came into cloud, that am I using the right tools? Because of the fact you need to have tools, or you need to have technologies in your cloud which are API ready. Otherwise, integrating them into your cloud environment becomes a nightmare. So again, this is again giving a rise, right? Then IoTs, we are moving towards Internet of Things, which is no longer just happening, but yes, 2020 is seeing a lot of movements happening across globally in Internet of Things. So this is where you're talking about it. If you look at a standard enterprise architecture in 2017 onwards, APIs are important. If you talk to any major organization, even if you look into your own organization, you'll see the quantum of API usage has increased drastically, including your third-party applications which you are connecting up or getting created. Then again, the attacks have started increasing in APIs, right? So typically, if you look at targeted attacks in enterprises, I'm talking about 2012, where I think there was a breach on Adobe, and then a lot of things have been happening since 2012, 13 onwards, where there have been breaches on security just because of the API being exposed, right? And the last, which is important, why we're talking about it is the APIs are major points of vulnerabilities, because it's important to understand that when given the ability, right? So the programmer who's defining it defines it in a certain way, right? But what we find missing is the quantum of testing which is done on after creating an in-house API is far minimal as compared to the entire application security. And the major queries we get back from organizations is, you know what, I don't need to worry about my API security because of the fact that I'm already using a tool called Nessus, I'm using Metasploit, I'm using Fortify, I'm using Akinetics, everything of them, they can name, and they say, we are already doing those and we are getting reports on API security. But what do they test? That's a big question out here. Any questions? Great. So no questions. So what are the challenges we are facing right now? The major challenges we face right now are different standards and frameworks. What do I mean by different standards and frameworks? It's a simple question. Are all web URLs APIs, and are all APIs web URLs? Right? That's a very simple question to understand. Yes, because typically if you look at the API definition, typically on REST and SOAP or XML, JSON, XML, etc., they all are talking about it's a web URL, it's a web endpoint which you get. You get an endpoint like HTTP, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so I have a question. Do we make sure our API is secure? So how do we make sure our API is secure? So how do you make sure your API is secure? So basically, just to answer this question, Abhishek, right? There are a couple of things which you need to look into when you are looking at securing your APIs. One is the format. Now, I'll give you a very small example. Recently, we were doing a small demo or a POC with a very large organization in the country, and we asked a simple question: what is the structure of your API? The answer we get is we are using a RESTful API. And then we asked, are you using a Swagger format? And they said yes. But when we got the API to test, we realized that the API was not following the Swagger format. So that's a very major issue in terms of understanding, because developers are just developing APIs without realizing, are they following the format being defined in the Swagger, or are they following the format being defined in the Open API standard 2.0? So that's one important thing to do in API security. Second important thing to do, Abhishek, is to check your API for security in terms of OWASP top 10. So finally, in 2019, last year, OWASP published the OWASP API 2019. So it talks about these are the top 10 attacks which are possible or ways to compromise an API. So you need to test them. Now typically when we ask organizations, after we started, after that paper got published, we asked organization how are they doing it. The answer was they were still fundamentally trying to figure out what is the next step to test the OWASP top 10, because there was not much of documentation or much of details given as to what are the test cases they can do. Maybe one or two. I think I remember reading that document very clearly. There was a couple of 2-3 points where you could look into it, and the number of vulnerabilities exposed were very, very minimal. So OWASP top 10 is one aspect of figuring out how your APIs are being secured. But the other important thing to do is to look at API security, is to do not manual testing, but automated testing. Presently, there are very few tools, or there are zero, I would say just one or two tools, which are doing API security for unknown, which is basically to figure out what could happen. So typically, just going back, Abhishek, to your question. So one is the framework which you're following. You need to adhere to the framework. So if you're following a Swagger, please adhere to that. If you're using a RESTful API, please adhere to the formats, because you got to use some nouns, right? You can't use nouns or verbs, or you can't have a mixture, because that creates a little confusion. Two is, how much of security testing are you doing? Looking at the OWASP API top 10. Three, test them for at least nothing less than 2,000 to 3,000 test cases minimum, because otherwise you'll not be able to get a good I would say output into your API security. Shubhank has a question. What is the architecture of API? Okay, sorry, Abhishek, does that answer your question, or do you want me to take it a little more deeper? Okay. And Abhishek, if you can share your email ID with Mohini, I can send you a separate one-to-one reply also on the details. There's something which we can share with you offline. Now, Shubhank, your question is, what is the architecture of API, and what are the checkpoints to control security breach for each and every component? If you can explain on granular level. Shubhank, it's a very good question. It would take me approximately maybe an hour to go into the details, and we can take that offline, because we have got, when we're talking about the architecture of API. Now, if you look at the present condition where the modern APIs are being consumed, presently, most of the organizations are mostly people are using RESTful or REST APIs, as you call it. SOAP API, which typically bare SOAP APIs, SOAP, are no longer to that level of consumption right now. So the first thing you need to follow in architecture of API is, again, are you using the Open API 2.0 standards, or are you using a Swagger format? You need to be very clear on that format, on the architecture. That is one, Shubham. Two, when you're talking about the security controls, right, or checkpoints to control the security breaches, again, I'm going back to the same question, the same answer I gave to Abhishek. OWASP Top 10 2019 is one of the standards which you can look into. Second is, if you're in the payment card industry, you can look at PCI DSS 2.0, 3.0 standards. Again, only as a reference to ensure that your test cases are following the pattern, right? But between the two, there's a quite an overlap in the test cases, so you should be very comfortable. And three, again, looking at an API. Now, let me give you a very simple example on Shubhank. Let's take, for example, you're using a RESTful API, and the API URL goes ahead and says, let's say you're going to check on the command for get, right? Now, typically, the best way to do it, the testing would be to look at all the use cases wherein you are looking at data which is already present in your database. So, for example, you say get name, right, equal to Mohit, right? First name is equal to Mohit. So you will get all the responses where the first name is equal to Mohit, right? So you're going to be storing that code and saying you're going to get a response code, which is a typical HTTP response code coming as 404. The exact error code will be 200 or 201, whatever you're getting it, right? That's one. Two, now you'll start testing for everything not equal to, which is not there in the database or which is not correct. For example, if you're going to do a SQL injection, or let's assume that you say first name is equal to Abhishek, and in the database there is nothing as Abhishek, so it'll give you an error code. It'll say no such data exists. This way, you'll be able to get all the information you need with regard to the data which is available. So you're getting two response codes. One is for valid data, and second is for invalid data. Now you got use cases where you're saying that this is the data which is present, for example, and this is the response code coming, and this is the data where there's no data present, and this is the response code coming. Sorry. Now you can start fuzzing or sending attacks to the device under test or your API under test by sending in data which is not as per the format required for an input. So for example, we start with OA auth 1 and we say authorization which is required, right? Which we can do for the testing. Second test case we could start with was going to be, let's say, get, put, and let's say get and post commands. We can easily get those commands because those are the two major commands which are getting exposed, right? And in those cases, since you have a number of already sequenced cases, let's say 10, 15, 20 of valid test cases, now you can start writing invalid test cases. That is, you need to have a traffic generator, not like a typical traffic generator, but a test case generator, which can create test cases for you, which will start doing not equal to the data which is there. Now, this is something simply equal to, a mutation-based fuzzing, wherein I take an input data and I start fuzzing using that data. This way, you'll be able to create at least nothing less than maybe around 2,000 to 3,000 plus test cases for each of the APIs being exposed. I can refer to you to a research paper which was published in 2018, I believe, on what are the minimum number of test cases one should do for an API before saying that, you know what, I'm good enough to move forward to that. So Shubhang, does this answer your question? Yes, there's a good document which gives in details API checkpoints. Again, if you just send a mail to Moini, we will address that and send it to you. So, sure. So, and I'm just coming back to the challenges. Now, when we were sharing different standards and frameworks, like I was just talking about, with regard to the two questions Shubhank and Abhishek had, uh, this is different standards. We're talking about what are the different types of APIs being consumed right now. There are at least 6 or 7 different types of APIs, typically when you're talking about it, which are being consumed. But the most common ones which are being consumed right now in the modern days are SOAP, which is number 2 right now, RESTful, which is number 1, and then you got JSON XML and JSON RPC. Now, JSON XML and RPC are more or less obsolete at this stage. Then the other things which you need to understand about APIs is also traditional way of APIs, which were the APIs to control into, let's say video drivers, etc., which again are there. Then of course you have got APIs which are on the operating system environment to integrate, which we're talking about a cloud environment where you need to integrate certain other tools and devices into it. But in terms of standards and frameworks, the most modern API being consumed, which is more being consumed exhaustively, are the RESTful APIs. Can you hear me now? Am I audible? Okay. No, I just got a message from Zaveri saying that I'm not audible. Rajesh Zaveri. Okay. The other important thing on the security side is unsecured APIs, right? Now, let's go back on again different standards and frameworks, right? Just to give you an idea. Now, let's take a use case where an application, where an let's say a banking environment or a financial institute or your internal development team, right, or your internal organization has an application which is a web-based application, right? And use case 1 where they have access to the source code. Now, typically when you look at tools, which is, you can say spidering, which is trying to figure out what are the various URLs being consumed within that web application, you can list them down. That's his first step. Once you have listed down the entire list of URLs, you would be looking at two factors: whether those URLs are APIs or not. They are not APIs. The first way to do it is you can validate those URLs as APIs by looking at a global database, or in case you have a database, let's assume that you figure out its name as a Google, sorry, or Facebook. You can refer to those sites to figure out if those URLs are matching or those endpoints are matching to the Google or the Facebook, etc. So let's assume that you scan your application, you get 100 different URLs. After looking at it, you get 50 of them, which are like Google and Facebook, etc., and Twitter. So you got 50 left out. The remaining 50 can be deciphered out by looking at the standards and frameworks. For example, you want to figure out, are they SOAP or they're RESTful or they're XML JSON or XML just or RPC. So you can literally look into those by looking at the standards being created for those. Now, if you understand RESTful, it's stateless, right? That's very important to do, understand. And then it, of course, if you ask RESTful, REST is equal to first name, right? Respond or get first name, right? It'll only get you the first name equal to Mohit. It will not get you any other data except every time you repeat the same question, get first name, right? Equal to Mohit, it'll only get you data with regard to first name equal to Mohit. It won't change. It's stateless, right? So you will have to look at those standards to figure it out. That's where the trouble starts off, is to figure out what APIs are being consumed. If I look at 2000, till 2016, 17, all the most of the traditional applications you're looking at are all RESTful API, sorry, all say SOAP APIs. And the present day scenarios, most of them are towards the RESTful side. Now, testing of third-party APIs is something where you need to take a permission. But the important thing is, when you're writing your own API, you could be consuming APIs which are being created by our developers which are not tested. That's one. Two, when you look at APIs or third-party APIs which you're consuming, if they are from renowned organizations, the tendency is generally not to test them, because those organizations before releasing have a security development life cycle where they would have tested those APIs using their own tools or own techniques. But the challenge comes in is when you're using third-party APIs which are not tested, unsecured. They could be having backdoors, trapdoors, or leaking out information which is beyond your control. So that's important. That's a challenge. Then is the vulnerable code. Now, like I shared with you a little earlier right now itself, that when you're looking at those third-party APIs or when you're looking at your own API, if you have not figured out the attack surface on that API, you could be exposing a lot of data from the code. For example, the history says very clearly is 2012 with the Adobe, right? There was an exposure to their RESTful APIs, which caused a lot of data to be displayed. It was able to display all the data. Second important thing too is compliance, right? You may have included in your code, or your third-party developer may have included in his code, APIs which are open source with a legal framework of being, let's say, a GPL license or an LGPL license. You have not tested those out. Or the terms and conditions of usage of that API does not allow you to use it for commercial purpose. Or the terms and conditions of the API force you to give your source code. Now, these are the terms of usage and inclusion which you need to check out. So when you're doing a spidering solution, like I was sharing earlier, you'll get complete list of bill of material of all third-party APIs being consumed, which is important. Third, which is the most important aspect again, is abundance right now. 2012, quantum of APIs were less than 100,000. 2019, there are more than 1.5 million APIs being circulated, consumed, accounted for. Some of them we don't even know of, right? So you keep on searching. I mean, every day when we are, our research team is working on it, every day we keep on adding into our database multiple APIs which are third-party APIs. Then we search them on the terms of usage. Then we search them for the code, if there's availability in the open source or Git, or then we search them for vulnerabilities across on Git or let's say on NVD, etc., where they're reported. So these are major challenges which are being faced by everybody. So Abhishek, going back to your question again on the framework, these challenges have to be addressed when you are creating or choosing APIs for your application, if you're a developer. And if you're a security expert or a security specialist, then this is something which you need to look into before, once your security testing starts out. You'll need to validate this information. Any questions? Okay, so no questions. I'll just move forward. One second. Okay, that's a good question. Sorry. What is the role of what's the name of the gentleman CFC 019103994? Is there a name? Amit. Okay. Hi, Amit. Okay, Amit. So, what is the role of API management in API security? It's a very good question. So, when we're talking about API management, right? So, we are talking about, are you talking about API gateways? Would that be yes? Yeah. So, what is an API gateway? API gateway is why would somebody need an API gateway? Let's try to understand the fact why would somebody need an API gateway. The reason somebody needs an API gateway is one is to manage the terms of use, is to manage that there's no misuse, unused or misused advantage of the API. So for example, in Google, you have an API gateway where if you are purchasing some APIs, they are able to manage how many API keys have you taken from them, because that's a billing cycle for them. So there are two aspects. One is internal consumption by, let's say, a BFSI or a manufacturing or any developer, a development organization or a customer. And second is third-party organizations which host API gateways. So for an API gateway hoster, that is for his billing purpose to manage. But for an organization which is consuming APIs, they need an API gateway to do two things. One is to ensure that the right APIs are being consumed within the organization by the developers, so that they do not face any legal or criminal breaches against usage of the APIs. That's one. Two, they are not crossing the limit which could result in an API, in a legal suit with the API supplier, that you're using APIs which you're using beyond your point. So they need to maintain that. Three, to maintain the quality of APIs, to ensure that you have you know exactly what APIs are being consumed within your applications. Because 90% or 99% of the time, security guys only come to know about the discovery after, maybe a few hours before the product has to be tested, right? So you normally get 8 to 10, maybe around a day or 2 days to security test the product, where you have to do everything on the product. So if you have a bill of material, validating using the API gateway becomes easy, because if your organization is using a gateway, you know exactly that you got application one, and you know exactly what are the APIs which are being consumed by the application one. So you can be proactive rather than being reactive. So looking at the gateway, you'll be able to make out, hey, you know what, I've got these 100 APIs my organization is consuming. As a part of my proactive approach, I can start researching them on them to figure out which are the ones which are safe, so that I can provide recommendations or remediations. Does that answer your question, Amit? Any more questions? Great. So I'll just move on to the next slide. So what is the approach? Our approach is to discover APIs, scan the source code to discover the third party and custom APIs. Why is it important? The reason I shared with you earlier is it's important because you need to know the bill of material for your application. Now, if there is no approach, like Amit just asked this question, what is the usage of the API management? So if you have an API gateway, the security team will know exactly what are the APIs being consumed. So you will be able to quickly validate the structure of your application, the bill of material quickly. And if you've already proactively security tested them, then you'll be much more easier for you to turn around and give a report. Jolly. Okay, so Jolly has a question. Can fuzzing tool perform the API security check? Which fuzzing tool are you talking about, Jolly? Okay, so Peach Jolly does not exist. They've been already acquired last year, so they don't have any availability of API fuzzing any longer. Apart from that, any other tool you think about? Okay, so typically that was a very good tool. We were working with them very closely before they got acquired last year. and that API security tool is no longer available. So yes, there are some tools. Again, like I shared with I can take that off with you on a one-to-one. You can email it to me. My email ID Jolly is, I'm just putting this on the chat window. You can reply to me there and I can just connect with you on that. So coming back to it, so scan source code and you have to scan the third parties. Now, only challenge with Peach was it would never scan your source code. It could not give you the list of APIs, right? So it would only tell you, it would only fuzz test or security test your APIs against OWASP top 10. That's all, right? But it would never give you the bill of material. So that was only addressing 25 or I'd say 50% of the problem. The remaining 50% of the problem is to scan the code to get a bill of material so that you can validate what are the third-party APIs being consumed in your organization. That's one. Two, you could also validate what are the in homegrown APIs which you are consuming, which is important to create your bill of material. Next is to validate the terms of usage of the third-party APIs. So that's what you do in a discovery process. So you'll be able to figure out, okay, I'm using a Google API, so what are the terms of usage? Am I legally allowed to use it in my software? If yes, are there any obligations to be fulfilled or there are no obligations? That's important to ensure compliance. Then identification. Once a discovery has been done, you need to identify and create a bill of material. So typically, I'll just go back to the old story which I took, which I used again in my last session. The moment you start a software development a project, right, in a 90-day window, right? The developer spends, I would say, the security guy only gets around a day or 2 days to security test the entire application for everything, from hosting services to application security to etc. Now, when the developer starts creating the bill of material, initially he starts with around 10, 20, or maybe let's say 30 components. But by the time the product gets created, a lot of things have changed. One, the quantum of components from 30 have gone to 300. That's one. Two, out of the 30 components which they were consuming, the version numbers of all 30 or some of them have changed drastically. Three, they're not even aware as to why they're using a component. Now, this results for the security team two major questions, which goes same case for APIs. Now, in case of an API, like I shared with you, right, it's not so easy as compared to doing an application security test. It's not so easy. It's slightly more complicated than doing a basic application test, using a SaaS or a DAS tool or an ISD. But this becomes a little more complicated because one, discovering the APIs or bombs, in the bill of material is very, very important. Because when you start scanning the source code, there are also dumb URLs. Dumb URLs meaning by mistake, the guy has just put an endpoint which he's not consuming at all. And there's no way to validate it till you execute that endpoint. So that's important to do, why you need a bill of material to that. Two, in identification is identify the security risk like I shared with you in the OWASP Top 10 2019, right? Then you identify unknown or zero-day vulnerabilities through exhaustive testing, which I described to you earlier. Then the other important part is monitoring and alerting. Now, if the tool is not CI/CD ready or a DevSecOps ready, by the time the security guy reports this back to the development, the product is already live, right? And it's going to be very cumbersome and very costly to fix it up. Now, if this tool was integrated in the CI/CD pipeline with Jenkins, let's say you fire a build, and you have a ticketing system like Jira, and you say this tool, this build should fail if there is any security vulnerability discovered as per OWASP Top 10. One. Two, if the terms of usage do not agree to the terms of usage as prescribed by your organization, that is two. And three, you are saying that this component or this API should not be in any of the blacklisted APIs which is created by my list. Now, if you have an API gateway and you're able to control all these three environments, automatically the tool, the build will fail, giving the alert to the security guy saying that this build has failed because of these reasons. Right? And this automatically you can alert the teams responsible to make the changes, whether it's in the source code, whether it's in the discovery of the API, etc. The next important point is recommendation. Now, this comes back to the security team and the legal team in a way to recommend what are the security vulnerabilities or what are the terms of usage for an API. So this becomes very, very important for an organization to look into it. Any questions? Any questions? Okay, so they're none. So just to give you an idea about what we were talking about, the security coverage, the unknown vulnerability, and you can see the terms of usage on the PCI coverage. So we're talking about security coverage. You can look at what type of an application the produces, what is the API key being used, are you using an OAuth, right? Are you discovering any unknown vulnerabilities, right? You can also look at methods like get, put, post, OAuth, patch, etc. You can check each and every aspect of the APIs. Now, I'm just going back to this slide, which is scan basically the on the discovery part, right, on security. Now, what happens in the security part out here? I'm just going back to the slide again. When you're doing the security testing, you have got a number of commands, right? Jolly, you asked this question about Peach. Have you used Peach? Okay. So which I mean, Jolly, if you can reply to me privately, for which company are you in terms of, because I don't know if anybody in India had used Peach API except a few. Okay. Okay, so you are an NPCI. So, but I am okay. I'll discuss with you offline. So typically coming back to API, right? So typically when you're looking at the API security, you got to look at OAuth 1. If there's authentication, you need to look at the testing. So when you start testing the entire application for vulnerabilities, or let's say unknown vulnerabilities, you're going to start looking at OAuth and see how is the OAuth being deployed if there's an authorization. Then you will start looking at commands for get, put, post, patch, delete, each and every command. Now, so when you wanted to do an unknown testing, the only advantage on Peach was that Peach would be able to do only OWASP top 10, but it was not focused on doing the unknown portion. So in that case, what happens is you have to have certain use cases which are positive test cases and certain use cases which are negative in the sense that they give you an error code which says insufficient data or no data present. And then you start fuzzing it out, right? So Jolly, your question on fuzzing HTTP and HTTPS is entirely different as compared to fuzzing an API. So that what you're talking about is an API, that is basically a protocol fuzzer where you're fuzzing an HTTP and HTTPS for 0-day testing. So I'm aware of what you're talking about on that front. So when we're looking at API fuzzing, what we need to look into is basically these important aspects. When you're trying to fuzz, are you trying to fuzz and get valid test cases for each of the commands which your application is consuming? You may be only using a get and a post command, for example, right? But you need to test out exhaustively at least thousands of cases for each of those commands which are being consumed in RESTful APIs. I'm not touching about the cases of SOAP APIs because SOAP is matured enough. It's now, you can say, like slowly moving away, and people are already migrating. Another important point to note is in 2017 or 16, globally people have started moving the APIs from HTTP to HTTPS. So if you as an organization are deciding to do that, I can share a document for you which you should follow if you are planning to migrate from an HTTP based APIs to HTTPS. Now, this is to talk about APIs, or this is to talk about when you own the source code. That means you have the source code. Now, in the last couple of, I would say the last year and a half, I got cases, or we were talking to people in the industry in different domains, and they said, you know what, we've got software, but we don't have access to the source code because of whatever reason. Is there a way? So we suggested them to do a couple of things. One of the ways was, you know what, if you own the software and you can host it, you can actually do a man in the middle, like an MITM, like a proxy, to figure out what are the different type of test cases which are going inside your APIs. Using that, you were able to figure out what are the different types of URLs which were being consumed by your application. And FYI, just to share with you, we were able to simulate this for one of our customers in India recently, and we have a product created around that on the API portion, where we were able to demonstrate that yes, we are able to discover APIs not 100%, but at least 60-65% of a code where we had no access to the source code. So we were able to successfully demonstrate that portion also. Of course, we are still researching on that area. Any questions? Any questions anybody has? None. Okay. So we're just going on to the last couple of slides. I think 1 or 2 slides left out. Terms of usage. Like I shared with you, why is it important to know the terms of usage? Right? If you look at these terms of usage, right, it's you are told what are the accepting terms of usage, right? Now the terms of usage could change when you absorb the API versus when you're using the API in a period of 3 to 6 months, right? So Google, every API developer or every API which you're consuming defines a term of usage. So it's important to measure or monitor that terms of usage only for one reason. Because if you don't do that, you'll be having a trouble, or legally you'll have issues. So if you see out here on the left hand side, we've identified you may disclose Google information. And the obligation here says, okay, so Jolly has asked me a question. Jolly, I think I'll reply to you on a one-to-one session on your question. And then you're talking about obligation. You will require end user to comply with, etc. And there's a prohibition. You will not use the APIs to encourage or promote illegal activities or violation of third-party rights. Now, these are very, very measurable terms which you need to look into the API usage before you decide to ensure that the API agreement is as per the policy. Because any deviation from this could result in the the organization which has leased the API to you from withdrawing its support, which means your application could be dead and done. So coming back very quickly as a recap, what we're looking at, whatever APIs, we need to have API gateways which are already in place. But then at the same time, we also need to ensure that we have API security testing being done, not manually, but in an automated fashion, because manually, typically, we've seen organizations not doing more than 150 to 200, max 400 test cases in total, good, negative, and positive test cases. So you need to test out your test cases in a very negative, in a manner which is CI/CD ready, because then you'll be able to derive the true value of your APIs. That's one. Two, you need to know the bill of material for whatever applications you are testing, so that you know exactly what is going inside your applications, what are the terms of usage, which is another important point. And lastly, you need to, of course, test for the APIs against OWASP top 10 and PCI DSS standards. But at the same time, you also need to test them for zero-day or unknown vulnerabilities on APIs, which could result in a data compromise. And last, which is terms of usage. So today's session, I think we've just kept it in under an hour as compared to last time. And I think I'll skip this slide. Any questions anybody has? So there are only 3 questions which I had, which I think I replied back. One was, let me just, yeah. Okay. Jolly had a question. Jolly, I'll address your question one-to-one. Anybody else has any questions? Okay. Which fuzz API tool are you talking about? Saurabh. Saurabh's question is, how effective is fuzz API, OWASP? So OWASP is a pretty effective tool to use for API, but I'm not sure do they do the API testing to that level. They only test it for I think fuzz API on Git only test for the OWASP top 10. If you go to Git, you will find at least 5 to 6 API testing tools available, which they don't test an API, they'll tell you the formats. So one of them we reviewed for somebody was it was able to tell them if you're following the Swagger format, they'll only tell you about the Swagger formats, etc. So if you're using API testing, Fuzz API is good enough to do a certain amount of work, not too much amount of work as what you're looking at. But if you're looking at only for OWASP top 10, Jolly has a question. When we spoke about API gateway, is it signature based or rules to be configured? Jolly, it depends on which API gateway you're consuming. So I believe there are a lot of API gateways in the industry. Each one of them has their own way of setting up. So if you can let me know which one are you talking about, and then I can tell you exactly what you can do with that particular API gateway. Okay, Jyotis has a question. Please share checklist for API security testing and the tools used. So I can share, Jyotis, you got my, I just put my email ID on chat again. You can just send me your question, your email ID, and I will reply back to you positively by Monday on this. But not Monday, I'll say on Saturday. So I can share you with you the checklist for API security testing. Tools used right now, there are not many tools in the industry, very honestly. We have created one tool, but typically it will only go into commercial sale by May, June, because we have an obligation to fulfill. Apart from that, we can't. Okay, OWASP Zap, OWASP Zap and Selenium. Selenium is a functional testing tool. OWASP Zap, you know what OWASP Zap does. So that's not a tool for API fuzzing or API testing. And Jenkins for CI/CD. Yes, you can use Jenkins. So typically, if you're using Selenium, right? If you're using Selenium, you can actually create your test cases for automation, right? And if you're able to do that, you can freeze the screens, and then it'll become easy for you to do your test case automation in that case. Burp Suite does not. Galaxy J6. What is the name of the gentleman in Galaxy or lady in Galaxy J6? Murtaza. Murtaza. So Burp Suite only will give you the list of, in a way, it'll do just the spidering for you, for telling you what are the URLs which are being consumed, but it doesn't give you a complete list. We've checked on that. So it will not do API testing. Shivam, so if the checklist you will share will be your PCI DSS, or is the same as for other compliances? So we have a checklist, the PCI DSS checklist and the OWASP Top 10 2019 checklist, more or less they overlap. So I can share with you I think somebody in the Cyberfrat community, I remember from Ratnakar Bank, had shared the OWASP Top 10 2019 earlier this year, or this year only. So that is the one which you can look into. And PCI DSS checklist, let me share that with you separately. That's a very good question, Saurabh. Static code, dynamic analysis, or a balanced approach? So static code is, of course, required to ensure that you're following the format, right? So for example, if you're using, so presently there are no static code tools to discover APIs rather than doing a manual testing. So we are working on that for, like I shared with you, so our commercial production will be available in somewhere in June or July. Presently, we are only focusing on one customer because that's a requirement we have. So static code review. So it is important to do that because of the fact that you need to ensure, if you're using RESTful APIs, you need to follow the process or the procedures. It's not a protocol, it's a process written, right? So you need to ensure that whatever processes are there for RESTful, checklist. You need to follow that checklist so that you at least adhere to our format. That's one. So you need to do the static code. And then dynamic analysis has to be done also. So it has to be an approach where you're doing both. Like you correctly have mentioned, a balanced approach. Yes, it's required for the security assessment. You can't say I've done figure out it's using a Swagger format or using Open API standards 2.0 and I'm good to go. No, you need to do that. Plus, you need to also follow the security standards. Okay. Murtaza, I got your email ID. Anybody else has a question? Yeah, okay. I see one more question from Saurabh. So Saurabh says, in case if the project is to delay restricted time, what would be appropriate? Okay. Well, if Saurabh, you're on the security team, you know how it works. Like you only get a few hours to do the security testing. So in case you have to deliver a project in a restricted timeline, the best way is to always ensure you have a DevSecOps environment. That means you need to have the right tools to be integrated for API security, for example. In this case, you're talking about API security. So the tool whichever you shortlist, right, for API security, if you have one, should be able to integrate with the build tool, typically build tools like Jenkins. You should also try to integrate with a ticketing tool, at least like Jira or Bugzilla, so that in case, if there is a build fail, automatic alerts should be sent to the respective team leads so that they are knowing that this product build has failed because of these reasons. So this is the only recommendation I can give you, that you need to look at appropriate ways to look at a tool which is CI/CD ready. If it's not CI/CD ready, it's going to be it'll not be bad, but it'll be good enough for you. But then CI/CD is the right way to go forward. Okay, Shivam, I'll just check your mail and respond back to you. I got your mail, Shivam. Okay, so Sachin, I also got your mail. Okay, I will share the checklist. Anybody else has any other questions? Jolly, I got your mail also. Okay, Vishal, please share this so that they can share with all the. Yeah, so Vishal, I'll share this checklist with Moini so she can share it with everybody.
Sure.
So I think it'll be easier, Moini. I'll just share the questions which people had, and I'll share the checklist also with you
Sure, sir.
by not tomorrow, but by Saturday or Monday for sure.
Okay. Okay. So do we have any more questions coming up?
I think we don't have any more questions. So this the intention about this session, honestly, with everybody was just to set across a teaser, just to figure out how much of APS security, what would I say, is important for people in the industry right now. And I can sense with at least 40 participants on the list, it's pretty exhaustive to understand. Yes, it is something of a serious concern. So Mohini, I'll share with you a couple of documents, which I'll share with you. Some of them are research papers, etc., which you can share with the community.
Okay. Okay. So with this, we will end the session now. And Also, the recordings of this session will be available by Monday for all the CF Plus members. So, and also who is not a CF Plus member and want to view the recordings can enroll at cyberfrat.com/plus. Professionals it is 1800 for 1 year, and for students it is 1200 for 1 year membership. So with this, we'll end the session. See you all for tomorrow's quiz on Instagram. Thank you.
Thanks, Moini. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.